Hello everyone and welcome to the Sky This Month for May 2023. My name's Paul Martinaitis and this show is brought to you by the Astronomical Society of South Australia. So we're at the end of autumn now. Nights are getting colder, but the trade-off is, of course, we can start our observing relatively early in the evening, and it's a wonderful time of year. Many fine objects are available to us. In particular, of course, galaxies. We're well into galaxy season now, as we'll see shortly. There's also a little bit going on in the solar system as well. It's a particularly good month for viewing the inferior planets, Mercury and Venus, and also Jupiter and Saturn are reasonably well placed for observation as well. So as usual, we'll begin today's show by taking a tour of the sky. So we'll begin our look in the western part of the sky. So the date shown here is the 15th of May. So that's just beyond the starting point of the dark sky period, where the moon won't be interfering with our observations. And the time is 9 p.m, so a couple of hours after the end of astronomical twilight. So being the end of autumn, the summer constellation of Orion, that's well below the horizon now. Canis Major soon to follow. The Argo Navis constellations of Vela, Carina, Puppis and Pyxis, they've been our friends for the last 3 months. Many great objects in there. Still reasonably well placed for observation, but starting to get a bit low now. So I would use May as your good last opportunity if you want to look at some of the fine objects in that region of the sky. Until next time. Then, of course, dominating the western sky, snaking near the zenith and then going all the way over to the east, is the longest constellation of Hydra. And we've often discussed two of the probably the best objects in Hydra, which is the Ghost of Jupiter Planetary Nebula. And I'll just put in another plug for one of the galaxies we discussed in last month's show, M83. Certainly, in my opinion, between M83 and 1566, they're the two best face-on spirals in the southern sky. So M83 very well placed at the moment, just far enough away from the zenith not to be a problem if you've got a Dobsonian telescope, but still nice and high. So if you can get under a dark sky, please do take a look at that. It's always worthwhile. So moving now along to the northern part of the sky, and you can appreciate now why we call this galaxy season. So when we look in this direction, we're actually looking perpendicular to the plane of our galaxy. So we're looking out into intergalactic space, and right here is the center of the Virgo supercluster, which is actually the supercluster that our own galaxy, the Milky Way, is a member of. So huge concentration of stars, of galaxies, sorry. So you've got Virgo, Leo, and Coma Berenices, and Canis Venatici as well. So those 4 constellations contain certainly some of the finest galaxies in the sky. So I think in a previous show last year we talked about Macarian's chain. So that's always worth looking at this time of year. I'll just kind of show you where that is. So Leo is a very distinctive sort of shape there. So you can see the tail of Leo. There's Beta Leonis. And there's Epsilon Virginis here. If you sort of draw a line between those 2 stars, go about halfway with your telescope. I'll put a telrad up so we can see where we're looking at. So you want to be about there, and that'll be the beginning of Macarian's chain, which is just a chain of very prominent galaxies. So the most prominent that you'll see here are these 2 giant elliptical galaxies, M84 and M86. And then you'll see these 2 elongated galaxies, each side of M86. Then you can follow the chain along. These are sometimes called the eyes for obvious reasons, because it looks like there's these 2, spooky eyes looking at you. And then you can follow the chain down to those 2 galaxies and then all the way down to here. So that's what's known as Macarian's chain. And it's wonderful just to put a reasonably wide field eyepiece in, start at M84 and just slowly scan the telescope along and see all of these galaxies in your field of view. So, of course, while we're in this part of the sky, there's many other galaxies to look at as well. So we've got Leo. Leo is good because of its distinctive shape. It's very easy to kind of, look at a star chart and navigate your way around. So probably the best galaxies to look at in Leo would be the famous Leo triplet, which you can find. Just look at the tail of Leo. It kind of makes a right-angled triangle here, and they're just there, just in that part of Leo there. So they're always worth a look at. And if you've got a wide enough field eyepiece, you can actually fit all three of those galaxies in the one field of view. And on a nice dark night, in addition to seeing the bright cores, you can actually see the orientation of each galaxy. So you can see M65 and 66 kind of lined up like that. And then you'll see the fainter barred galaxy along the bottom at right angles to those two. Moving down a bit, we also have Coma Berenices, a lot of nice galaxies in here also, and that's the constellation that we're going to focus on in today's show. So I'll talk about that very shortly. So finally, looking a bit lower, below Coma Berenices, we have Canis Venatici, and there's a lot of really good galaxies in this region of the sky also. Unfortunately, generally a little bit low for us here in the Southern Hemisphere, but if you've got a good unobstructed northern horizon, and in particular for those of you here in Adelaide who are going to the Alpana camp later on in May, where you're an extra 4 degrees north, that gives you quite an advantage at looking at some of the galaxies down here as well. In particular, of course, the famous Whirlpool galaxy, M51. And I think what's amazing about this galaxy is in my 12-inch, even despite the fact that it's only 10 degrees from the horizon or less, often I can still make out the spiral structure quite readily, and also see its nearby companion. So particularly if you're going up to Alpana, and you do take a look at M51. So we'll now turn east. So as we turn east, we'll be looking perpendicular to our galaxy. As we turn towards the eastern part of the sky, we're now looking really towards the center of our galaxy now. So of course, that's what we see as the Milky Way, the disk. And you can see that as we're heading towards winter, Scorpius and Sagittarius are now starting to rise. So, and they, of course, are towards the center of our galaxy, right about there. And I guess if it's galaxy season now, in a couple of months' time, it's going to be globular season, because you can see all these wonderful globular clusters in this region of the sky. So something to look forward to in the coming colder months. Finally, winding our way south, we can see this time of year, right up the top, the cross is pretty much really at its highest point. And the other constellation of significance in this part of the sky is, of course, Centaurus, or is also placed nice and high. So let's now look at the lunar calendar for May. So you can see it this month. At the beginning, darkness began around 1900, 7 o'clock, and went through to 5:24 in the morning. So by the end of May, nights are getting even longer, and the darkness begins at 1843 and goes right through to 5:42 in the morning. So the dark sky period, where the moon won't interfere with our deep sky observations, that begins on around the 11th, and it will go right through to about the 22nd. So the moon phases, full moon occurred on the 6th of May, last quarter will be on the 12th, new moon will be on the 20th, and first quarter will be on the 28th. So let's now take a look at the solar system. So May is an excellent month to view the inferior planets, Mercury and Venus. So with Mercury, we can see at the beginning of May, it started off in inferior conjunction with the Sun, but as May rolls on, it rapidly moves out of the way, away from the Sun from our point of view. So by about the 15th, you can start looking for Mercury in the pre-dawn sky. And by the time we reach the 29th of May, it'll reach greatest elongation. So that will be where it appears the furthest distance from the sun, from our point of view. And the other nice thing is Mercury, for most of the month, will be displaying a nice partial phase as well. And both for Mercury, and that's also the case for Venus. So Venus, for all of May, will appear as an evening object. And it begins and ends the month quite a distance from the sun. So you should get good viewing of Venus throughout May. So looking a bit further out now, Mars is also an evening object. Unfortunately, the distance between us and Mars is now ever increasing. So its apparent diameter has now shrunk to about 5 arc seconds. So really no longer an object that you'll see any detail on, and we're going to have to wait a bit less than 2 years until we come towards opposition again to have another good look at Mars. Turning back to the dawn sky, Jupiter and Neptune and Saturn are all well placed in the early hours of the night after midnight. So the only other planet that we can't really view at the moment is Uranus, which is behind the sun at the moment. Okay, we'll now take a look at some of the planetary opportunities for May. So on the 18th, before the sun rises, this shows you around 6 a.m. before the sun rises, Jupiter, Mercury, and the Moon will all be quite close together in the sky. So, and both will show quite a slender crescent. So the Moon, shown on the left, there will be really just a very, very slender crescent as it heads towards a new moon. And Mercury will also show quite a slender crescent as well. So if you happen to have your binoculars, or even better, just a small telescope out, excellent opportunity to view both the moon, but in particular Mercury, and see that nice slender crescent. And while you're at it, of course, don't forget to take a look at Jupiter as well. Always worth a look. Even at this time, we're well away from opposition, which is going to be occurring in November. But even so, its current diameter is still an amazing 34 arc seconds. And finally, towards the end of the month, this shows you on the 28th of May. So throughout May, Saturn is also quite a good object in the early hours after midnight. So this shows you on the 28th of May, which is a time where Saturn actually reaches quadrature, which kind of means if you draw a line between the Earth and the Sun, that is at right angles to the line between the Sun and Saturn. So when it's at quadrature, that's when Saturn's shadow on its own rings will be the most prominent. So around the 28th is all of the month, but particularly on the 28th or thereabouts is a good time to view Saturn. The only unfortunate thing is you got to get up rather early in the morning. And the other thing is it's also a good opportunity if you wish to take a look for Neptune. You can see there it's near the circlet of Pisces, and it was like that in April, and it really hasn't moved much at all. So this month we're going to be concentrating on Coma Berenices. So Coma Berenices is a relatively faint constellation, appearing below the much larger Virgo and sort of to the right of Leo. And you can see Coma Berenices represents a lock of hair. So its figure representation is really just a right angle of stars. So even under a dark sky, I usually find those three, to my eye, relatively faint stars hard to pick out from the background. But what is very prominent is the Coma cluster. So it's that Y-shaped formation of stars you see there. So if you look below Virgo and just to the right of Leo, you'll see this sort of Y-shaped pattern of stars in the sky called the Coma cluster. So that in itself is quite a nice binocular object. And right at the bottom of that Y is Gamma Coma. And then you can trace it along, and then you can find the corner star, Beta, and then finally to alpha. So our first object is going to be a double star, Burnham 800, and that's going to be near alpha, which you'll find up in this corner here. So to find Burnham 800, I'm just going to zoom in to Alpha Comae right here. And I should mention that Alpha Coma itself is a double star as well, but currently its separation is 0.4 arc seconds. So that's a very challenging split, even in a large aperture. It requires a reasonably large aperture and also a night of excellent seeing, which is probably even more important. So we're just zooming in on alpha here. So remember, these are the Telrad rings. So this represents 1 degree. This represents 2 degrees. And the star we want is over here. So that kind of gives you a location. So I guess if you're using your finder scope, you could jump to this star here. And then you should see a relatively bright triangle of stars. And the one we want is at the top of that triangle. So that's Burnham 800. So this is actually a triple star. So it's got 3 components listed. My understanding is that the A and B components are the ones that are truly in orbit amongst one another, amongst a common barycenter. Component C is just what we call an optical double. In other words, it's not physically in orbit with the A and B components. So relatively close star, 37 light years, discovered by S. Burnham. And according to Hartung, in his famous guide for astronomical objects for southern telescopes, Burnham, when he first discovered this star in, I think it was, 1881, the separation was only 1.3 arc seconds. So reasonably difficult to split. You certainly need a night of good seeing. Currently, here in 2023, its separation is about 7.2 arc minutes. So that's splittable really in any sort of telescope, even as small as a 50 millimeter 2-inch telescope. So it has an orbit of about 90 astronomical units. So that's 90 times the distance between the Earth and the Sun. And its orbital period is understood to be around 770 years. So the 2 components themselves appear to most observers to be an orangey reddish sort of colour. So quite an interesting double star to check out. And it's also quite near our next 2 objects of interest as well, which are globular clusters. The first is M53, and that is a relatively concentrated globular. And you can see there globulars have what's called a Shapley-Sawyer classification, which basically means 1 are the most concentrated ones. In other words, they most look like a ball with a concentrated core. As we get to 5 or 6, they're a little bit looser. And by the time we get to 10, 11, and 12, they're very, very loosely associated. They're virtually more like an open cluster. So this gives you a chance to sort of compare 2 very different globular clusters. We've got M53, relatively concentrated, has a concentration class of 5, and it's also relatively bright at an integrated magnitude of 7.5. Then on the other hand, we have actually a closer globular at around 50,000 light years, but its class is 11, so almost as loose as it gets. So this will appear much fainter than M53 and also much more dispersed. It'll appear really almost like an open cluster of faint stars. And the other great thing is, because they're so close together in the sky, if you've got a wide field eyepiece, it's possible to actually fit both globulars in the same field of view, which is not terribly common. So I'll just show you where the 2 globulars are. So currently we're looking at Burnham 800. So here's alpha over here, and you can see the 2 globulars are really just below. So they kind of form a rhombus of some sort, I guess. So there's Burnham 800, alpha, and if we swing down this way, there's M83, and to the right is NGC 5053. And remember these Telrad circles, they represent, that's half a degree, and that's 2 degrees. So you can see there, I would estimate those globulars are about a degree apart. So if you've got an eyepiece that can give you 1 degree or more apparent field of view, you can actually fit both of those globulars in the same field of view, which is quite nice. Okay, our final 2 objects now. Let's look at some galaxies. So the first galaxy we're going to look at is M64, or the famous Black Eye galaxy. So I'll just start at alpha and just zoom out a little bit so you can see where we're looking. So there's the right angle square of Coma. So M64 is just located here. So one good way to find it might be starting at alpha and then locate this relatively bright star here, which is 35 Coma. Also known as, so that sigma stands for Struve. So Struve 1687. So that's also a double star. And I'm not sure on the data on that. So let's see, Struve 1687. So that's a triple star. So the 2 closest components have a separation of 1.2 arc seconds. So you should be able to do that in say a 6-inch telescope or above, but you will need relatively good seeing. And the third component is a very wide 29 arc seconds. So while you're there, why don't you have a look at that as a bonus double star, and then you can just move down there and take a look at M64. So let's look at some pictures. So you can see there from the picture why it's called the Black Eye galaxy, because it sort of looks like, the core looks like an eye, and it's got that dark ring above it. So you can see to the top right here, this Hubble Space Telescope image really shows that dark lane in a lot of detail. So that's actually dust that obscures the starlight behind it. So this is one of the more prominent dark lanes. The other galaxies with dark lanes are, of course, 5128, or the Hamburger galaxy in Centaurus, and also, of course, the Sombrero galaxy as well. So those 2 plus the Black Eye have some of the most prominent dark lanes of any galaxy. So the photo you can see here on the left is more typical of an impression of what you'll see through the eyepiece. So you'll see this kind of fuzzy oval halo. In the center, you'll see a bright core, and then above or below the core, depending on what your field of view does, you'll see that dark lane. So it'll look like a dark eyelid next to that core. So a really interesting galaxy. And you can see there its distance is quite a distance, 17.3 million light years. So the final galaxy we're going to look at is NGC 4565. And this is a galaxy that's edge-on, and this is probably the quintessential edge-on galaxy available to us, 4565. Beautiful long spindle of light, and again it has one of these really prominent dusty dark lanes riddling the field of view. So this is really worth looking at in any telescope. Certainly in my 12-inch, totally fills the field of view of most of my eyepieces. Long, slender pencil of light. I can see that bulge in the middle, and on a good night of good seeing and transparency, I can see quite a bit of detail in that dark lane coming across as well. Note too that the distance of this galaxy is a lot further away than the one previously. So the Black Eye is about 17.3 million light years away. NGC 4565 is a whopping 42.7 million light years away. But it has a similar physical diameter. So I'll just finish off by showing you where to find it. So here we are at M64, and 4565 is located here. So probably the best way is to start at gamma, find this Y, this Coma cluster, go up to the edge of the Y, something like that, and then you can sweep across and sweep up 4565. So they're two of the best galaxies in coma, but there's many, many others for you to explore as well. Thanks everyone for joining me in today's show. I hope you found the information interesting, and hopefully you'll get some nice clear nights and some opportunities to view some of the wonderful thousands of wonderful galaxies that you can view this time of the year. So until the June show, take care and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.